There's a quiet terror that creeps in when you realize the universe doesn't care you exist. You look up at the night sky, at the endless darkness, the distant stars, the silence of it all, and feel yourself shrinking into dust. The ego resists this idea. It wants to matter. It wants to be noticed, to be remembered. So we build resumes, collect achievements, chase relationships, and speak louder and louder, just to leave a mark on something that has no obligation to remember us. Most people take this truth as an insult. They call it nihilism. They say it's cold, meaningless, even cruel. But what if it's the opposite? What if the fact that the universe doesn't care is the most liberating truth you'll ever hear? Alan Watts once said, "You are a function of what the whole universe is doing, in the same way that a wave is a function of the ocean. Not separate, not insignificant, simply not central." And in that shift, from ego to being, something beautiful unfolds. If the universe has no expectations of you, then you are free from the burden of constantly justifying your existence. You don't have to impress the stars. You don't need to earn your right to be here. You already are, and that changes everything. We'll spend the next few minutes walking through this truth, how terrifying it feels at first, and how, once embraced, it becomes your liberation. And if this reflection stirs something in you, I invite you to subscribe, to share it with someone who might be carrying the same weight, and to leave a comment. Every small action helps spread this message to other men who need to be reminded. Not being the center of the universe might be the beginning of true peace. As children, we are taught, sometimes gently, sometimes not, that we must become something, that to matter is to be important, to be loved is to be exceptional, that the world is watching, measuring, waiting to decide if we are worthy of attention, of praise, of being remembered. So we learn to perform, to become better, smarter, stronger, more useful. We carry this burden into adulthood, dragging the weight of imagined judgment through our relationships, our careers, even our private thoughts. Every mistake feels fatal, every failure, a verdict, and beneath it all, a question echoes. Am I enough? But the universe, vast and indifferent, offers no answer. It doesn't clap for your victories. It doesn't grieve your losses. It simply is. And this silence, at first, feels like abandonment, like a parent turning their back, like the sky refusing to look down. But Alan Watts saw something different in this silence. He understood that it was not abandonment. It was freedom. Because the truth is, if the universe doesn't care whether you succeed or fail, then there is no test, no score, no final grade to fear. You can stop pretending, stop performing. You can simply be. This realization is not comfortable. In fact, it can feel like death, the death of the self you built to impress a world that was never watching. But what dies is not the real you. What dies is the tension, the anxiety, the false belief that your worth depends on recognition. And when that falls away, something raw and honest is left behind. A man who is no longer seeking approval, no longer terrified of disappearing, because he understands. He was never separate to begin with. He was part of the dance the whole time. When a man begins to grasp that the universe is not judging him, something deep inside starts to loosen. He no longer walks into rooms trying to prove his value. He no longer speaks just to be heard, or strives just to be seen. The pressure begins to dissolve. It's as if he had been running for years with a rope around his neck, tied to the idea that he must matter more than others, must be remembered, must leave something behind. But now he feels the rope snap. And with that break, there's a strange peace. Not because he's given up on life, but because he's finally given up on the illusion that he needs to be special, to be real. Alan Watts often reminded us that life is not a journey with a destination. We are not on a conveyor belt moving toward some grand moment where everything makes sense. Life, he said, is more like music. You don't listen to a symphony just to get to the last note. You don't dance to arrive at the end. You dance because this step matters, because the now is complete. But this idea feels foreign to many men, especially those raised to believe that worth is earned only through sacrifice, only through sweat, only through victory. So we become obsessed with legacy, with achievement, with conquest. We fear death not because we'll vanish, but because we worry no one will remember we were here. And yet when you look at the stars, you realize how foolish that fear is. Not because you don't matter, but because everything does. The tree matters. The ant matters. The man sleeping under a bridge matters. And not because they're productive, not because they're successful, but because they are. The sun doesn't rise for the rich. The rain doesn't fall for the remembered. Existence itself is the miracle, and it is shared. Once this truth takes root in a man's heart, he starts to act from a different place, not to prove he deserves to be alive, but because he already is, and he wants to move with that gift, not against it. This changes how he speaks, how he loves, how he works. He may still chase dreams, but not because he thinks they'll finally complete him. He chases them because he wants to express something honest, something unfiltered, and he understands now that success doesn't make him more worthy, just as failure doesn't make him less, because worth was never up for debate. It was never negotiable. The universe never offered it as a reward. It offered it as a starting point. The only one demanding proof was him. And now that he's stopped, everything is quieter, still, and strangely, more alive than ever. But the man who lives this truth will not be easily understood. To those still caught in the game, he looks strange. He no longer competes. He's no longer concerned with titles, no longer chasing applause. He doesn't post for attention. He doesn't argue to win. He listens more than he speaks, and when he does speak, his words come slowly, like stones placed one by one. People might say he's changed, that he's withdrawn, that he's lost ambition, but they don't see what's happened beneath the surface. What they call distance is actually depth. What they call detachment is presence. He's not above the world. He's just no longer trapped inside its illusions. Alan Watts warned us that the ego is a trickster. It convinces us we are separate from everything around us, and then sells us solutions to cure that separation. It tells us to build ourselves up, to shine brighter than others, to be louder, faster, more visible. But in doing so, we disconnect even further. We become fragments, trying to be whole. And the harder we try, the more alone we feel. But when a man begins to see that he is not separate, that he is the dance, the wave, the breath, then he no longer needs to shout. He belongs already. And yet, this belonging doesn't make him soft. On the contrary, it gives him a different kind of strength, a quiet one. A man who no longer needs to be the center of anything becomes unshakable. He can be insulted and not collapse. He can be forgotten and still feel full. He doesn't cling to praise. He doesn't fear rejection. Because he's no longer performing for anyone. He has stepped off the stage. He's watching now from the edge of the room, not in bitterness, but in peace. This peace is not passive. It's powerful, because it frees his energy. Instead of wasting it on appearances, he pours it into what matters. He listens with his full attention. He creates without fear. He loves without possession. His presence becomes heavy, but not oppressive, like a mountain that simply exists, unmoved by storms. And the people who notice this presence, even if they don't understand it, feel it. They feel safer around him, calmer, as if his stillness gives them permission to rest too. Eventually, the man begins to notice something even more surprising. Life becomes lighter, not because problems disappear, but because they no longer define him. He's no longer obsessed with outcomes. He doesn't live in the future, grasping for what might come. Nor does he live in the past, dragging behind him a suitcase of what-ifs. He simply shows up, here, now, without needing the moment to be anything other than what it is. This doesn't mean he's numb. It means he's free. Free to respond, not react. Free to let go, not escape. This transformation ripples through every part of his life. Work becomes less about validation and more about expression. Relationships become less about filling a void and more about sharing space. Even his solitude changes flavor. No longer loneliness, but stillness. He walks alone not because he's rejected, but because he no longer needs to be surrounded to feel complete. And in that solitude, he meets himself, maybe for the first time. Not the version he projected to the world, but the one who's been quietly watching all along, behind the masks, behind the hunger. People don't always know what to do with someone who's found peace outside the system. Some will distance themselves, unable to relate. Others will try to pull him back in, not out of malice, but because his presence challenges their entire reality. His silence reflects their noise. His calm exposes their tension. But he doesn't resist them. He doesn't try to fix anyone. He simply is. And that isness, that refusal to be more than what he is in the moment, is what makes him magnetic, even if he no longer seeks to be seen. Alan Watts often spoke of the absurdity of control, the way we scramble to secure life, to trap it in goals and identities, never realizing that this effort only tightens the chains. The man who lets go doesn't become careless. He becomes graceful. He dances with life instead of wrestling it. He begins to trust the rhythm, to move with it. And in doing so, he finds something that striving could never give him: joy. Not the kind that burns out after a high, but the quiet kind that glows in the chest, even on ordinary days. In time, something even deeper begins to unfold. Not just peace, not just freedom, but a kind of reverence for being itself. The man who once cursed the sky for its silence now walks under it with awe, not because he thinks the universe owes him anything, but because he has finally stopped demanding it does. And in that surrender, he starts to see. The small things glow again. The taste of food is richer. The sound of wind carries meaning. The body feels more alive, not because it's more powerful, but because it's no longer at war with itself. He doesn't chase pleasure the way he used to, nor does he fear pain as he once did. He accepts both as visitors, welcomed, watched, and allowed to pass. He knows now that meaning was never something to be earned or explained. It was something to be experienced, directly, simply, without adornment. This is perhaps the most radical shift, when a man stops asking life to prove itself. He doesn't need signs or symbols or guarantees. He can sit in silence without asking for answers. And in that silence, he discovers a kind of meaning so profound that it cannot be put into words. Not because it's complex, but because it's too simple to explain. There is a myth we carry, that without being someone, life has no value, that if no one remembers our name, we were wasted. But Watts pointed to the absurdity of this. Does the flower bloom to be remembered? Does the bird sing for legacy? Do the stars shine for applause? Of course not. And yet, they are complete. The man who awakens to this truth stops trying to carve his name into stone. He begins instead to live like water, flowing, adapting, nourishing where he can, leaving no trace where he cannot. On the outside, he may appear ordinary. He might not stand out in a crowd. He may never be called a success by the world's standards. But his life is no longer built on appearances. It's built on presence, on truth, on depth. He might still strive, still dream, still build, but not because he's chasing something, because he's dancing with it. And the difference is everything. When your life is no longer a performance, it becomes a prayer, a quiet offering to the world. This man doesn't seek to escape reality. He embraces it. He doesn't need to be needed. He doesn't fear being forgotten. He knows that the wave eventually returns to the ocean, that the drop of water is never separate from the sea. And in that knowing, he walks lightly, speaks truthfully, loves deeply. He doesn't try to leave a mark. He tries to leave the world less burdened by his passing, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude, because to have existed, even for a moment, is miracle enough. So in the end, what once felt like a cosmic insult, that the universe doesn't care you exist, becomes your greatest liberation. Because if nothing out there is demanding that you be more, do more, impress more, then you are free. Free to stop pretending, free to stop running, free to live without apology, without shame, without the endless pressure to become something extraordinary. And when that weight lifts, what remains is the quiet joy of simply being. You realize you were never separate from the whole. You were never an outsider looking in. You were always the dance, the breath, the wave returning to the ocean. This is the paradox. The moment you accept that you are insignificant in the grand scheme of things, You become deeply connected to everything. You belong not because you earned it, but because you are it. And that is more sacred than any title, more lasting than any legacy. What looked like isolation becomes union. What felt like meaninglessness becomes the purest kind of meaning, the kind that asks for nothing and gives everything. You don't need the universe to notice you, because you are no longer waiting to be chosen. You have already chosen to be here, fully. So walk gently, live honestly, laugh when you can, cry when you must, and let go when it's time. You don't need to carry the world. You are already part of it, and that is enough. If this reflection found you at the right moment, I invite you to stay. Subscribe to the channel, not out of obligation, but because you want to keep exploring this path. Share this video with someone who still feels the weight of proving themselves. And leave a comment below. Tell us what part of the chase you've let go of, or what clarity you found in the silence. Every comment adds depth to this space, reminding others that they are not alone in their journey back to what's real.